Welcome in, Ravens flock. This is Jordan with Ravens Flash Report, and today I'm going to be previewing for you this week's upcoming matchup where the Los Angeles Chargers will be playing host to your Baltimore Ravens. The Chargers enter with a record of 4-6 and occupy the 4th place spot in the AFC West, where the only team over 500 is the Chiefs. Meanwhile, the Ravens come in boasting an 8-3 record, which not only has them leading their division, but the entire AFC as well. This is going to be a game where offense is prominent, but defense will ultimately decide who comes out the victor. In this video, I will not only be giving you important player matchups to be on the lookout for, but also facts and figures for both teams' offensive and defensive units, and even keys to victory for both teams on how I believe each should choose to attack or defend against the other. Now, let's get to it.
They're going to get a Super Bowl out of me. Believe that. Believe that. I'm a Raven. It's on. All year. Every year.
First, let's take a look at these teams' offensive numbers, shall we? You can see that both teams move the ball well and score often, so I don't expect this to be a blowout or a low-scoring game. With both teams averaging around 3 touchdowns per game, and obviously with them averaging higher than 21 points per game, they also kick a few field goals as well. The defense is where we see some stark contrast. In every metric except rushing yards per game allowed, which is neck and neck, the Ravens' defense outperforms the Chargers' defense. While I just said I don't expect this to be a low-scoring game, if the Ravens' defense shows up the way it has against several teams this season, it could end up very well being a decisive victory for the Ravens. Unfortunately for the Chargers fans, I don't see the opposite being very likely, as the Ravens have scored at least 30 points in their last 5 games and haven't dipped below 20 points since Week 5. The Chargers' defense, meanwhile, has allowed an average of 32 points a game to teams with a winning record this season. So, there are more battles than just the ones I have listed here, but I find that these 5 will not only be fun to watch, but also prove to be extremely significant to each team on both sides of the ball. Starting with Patrick Queen and Austin Ekeler, some fans of both teams might be wondering why I have Queen up here instead of Roquan Smith, and the simple answer is that Queen has a higher completion percentage and a higher QB rating against him when covering running backs who break out on routes. This has been true for most of the season, but the trend continued again against the Bengals with Joe Mixon, with Ekeler being a stellar running and receiving back, amassing 650 yards from scrimmage and almost 40 of those yards from receiving. I'd say anyone covering him, but especially Queen, is going to have their hands full on Sunday. The next battle to watch is basically the opposite of the proverbial coin. Gus Edwards, while still in a committee, has shown that he can handle the lion's share of the touches on this offense, and seeing more and more use on third down in both pass blocking and catching the ball. Not only do I see Isaiah Likely becoming more involved with Mark Andrews out, I also see Edwards as a partial security blanket replacement. He not only has shown secure hands while catching the ball, only missing 1 target all season, he also has shown impressive yards after catch ability. But most important, he has an obvious connection with Lamar and is showing that street ball style of play that Lamar also plays. However, whether it's Gus Edwards, Keaton Mitchell, or Justice Hill, they'll find a very capable linebacker facing them in Kenneth Murray. With almost as many targets as Roquan with 51, but with only as many completions as Queen at 35, Murray has a much lower completion percentage against him, as well as a significantly lower rating while facing opposing quarterbacks. Murray will be a difficult roadblock for Ravens running backs, but is someone that they will undoubtedly have to beat a few times if they want to win this game. Getting away from the backs and getting into the receiving matchups, we have Brandon Stephens covering Keenan Allen. Now, just like the previous matchups, these two won't be facing each other with every snap and every rep, but when they do face off, it will be often and entertaining. Keenan Allen is a true number 1 for this Chargers team and has been for all of Herbert's career with the Chargers. Already with over 1,000 yards through just 10 games, this marks the 6th season for the 11-year vet with at least 1,000 yards. And if the Ravens thought they could slip by this team without catching him on a slow day, they're out of luck. He really doesn't have a lot of those. Just in the past 2 weeks, Allen has a stat line of 21 receptions on 30 targets, 291 yards, and 3 touchdowns. So basically, he has 3 touchdowns and almost 300 yards on a 70% catch rate, which is superior to those numbers of OBJ, Zay Flowers, and Rashad Bateman combined over the same 2-week period. Brandon Stephens, however, may just be the guy to slow this stat monster down, Over the past 3 games, Stevens has allowed only 4 receptions on 19 targets for 33 total yards, and his only touchdown reception so far of the season to Jamar Chase in the end of the game when the game was well out of hand. Over the same 3 games, that completion rate comes out to only 21% and a QB rating of 70.8. And while that completion percentage is lower than his season average, the 70.8 QB rating is exactly the same as his regular season average. As I said earlier, Stevens won't be the only one asked to help cover Allen, but when he is, he should see a great matchup between the two. Khalil Mack is knocking on the door of 100 sacks over his career with 95.5, and could very well eclipse the century mark this season with the way he's playing. 11 sacks through 10 games, and 3 of those games were multi-sack games. His best game came against the Raiders, where he racked up 6 sacks, 5 tackles for loss, 4 QB hits, 2 forced fumbles, and a pass deflection. If Mack plays as well against the Ravens as he did against the Raiders, Lamar is going to be in trouble. The Ravens' offensive line has been up and down in pass protection all season, but the majority of the down has been from the tackle position. There were games where the tackle positions were good, but most games we Ravens fans have seen Lamar having to duck a defender or two from the side and scramble to space. If Lamar wants to have time and space to throw, with Mack coming from the other side of the line, he's going to have to get some much-needed help from the tackles on the right side and definitely on the left. At the beginning of this portion, I stated that there were many battles that I could have had up here. Lamar Jackson versus Derwin James, OBJ versus Asante Samuel Jr., or even Justin Madubuike versus whoever tries to block him. But this last matchup I think is more interesting than those, because I want to see the continuing development of the budding star that is Odafe Oweh. And in the last 5 games after coming back from injury, Oweh has gotten 4 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, 6 QB hits, and a whole lot of pressure. Herbert is a good quarterback, and will shred a defense if given enough time, and I want Oweh to be the reason he doesn't ever seem to have enough of it. Now, for each team, there are things that they do well in some areas that their opponents can exploit to great effect. For the Ravens, they have an amazing run game that needs to be used and used effectively. They do well when spreading the ball out, and without Mark Andrews, the Chargers can't know who the ball is going to on 3rd down, and that makes the Ravens' offense more diversified in its approach. Ravens pressure opposing quarterbacks the highest number in the league, and they need to keep that trend up on Sunday. And last, if the Ravens defense gets gassed early in the game because of long drives, it won't be pretty in the 4th quarter. They need to make sure that doesn't happen by finishing on 3rd downs. Now for the Chargers. The Ravens have had trouble all year covering running backs out of the backfield, and with Eckler, he can cause some major problems on that front. The Chargers need to protect Herbert up the middle of the line because if that middle gets pushed in, the outsides will crash in and that pocket will collapse in an instant. And as discussed earlier, the Ravens' tackles have shown some ability to be exploited, and the Chargers should test that out early and often. Lastly, if the Ravens get their run game going up the middle, then say goodbye to any chance of making progress against them later in the game, because they will wear you down in the second half and have 8, 9, and even 10-minute drives that will keep the offense off the field. So, that's not only who you need to be on the lookout for in this game, but also how each team can make the most of not only their strengths, but also their opponent's weaknesses. Now, I'm not going to hype this up too much, because I do think the Ravens take this win, but I want to hear your guys' predictions below in the comment section. As for mine, I have the Ravens winning 35-17. Anyway, that's going to do it for me here today. If you haven't already, please like the video if you've made it this far, comment your predictions below, and subscribe too while you're at it. I look forward to catching you all after the game for the recap, and until then, stay safe out there, and go Ravens.